This is HOA boardroom battles. I did not raise my voice, I raised my evidence packet. I am standing in my driveway in the middle of a February blizzard holding a bucket of ice melt, and the HOA compliance officer is screaming at me about snow that does not exist. Her name is Melissa Carter, but everyone calls her Linda because she insists on it, and right now her face is the color of a stop sign. She is jabbing a piece of chalk at the air between us like it is a courtroom exhibit, and behind her I can see the orange cone she dragged out of a snowbank and planted in my driveway to block my exit. "This is not snow, it is non-compliance," she shouts, and I realize she is serious. She actually believes that. I moved to this subdivision outside Chicago 3 years ago because the commute to my notary office downtown was manageable, and the neighborhood looked quiet. The Meadowbrook Blizzard Zone Winter Compliance Association was already in place when I bought the house, and the name should have been a warning. They treat winter like a war zone and every resident like a suspect. Linda is the neighborhood watch liaison, which means she patrols the streets with a clipboard, a tape measure, and a key ring full of gate fobs that she jingles whenever she wants to remind you she has access to everything. I have seen her measure snow piles with a ruler in the middle of a storm and take close-up photos of ice patches on sidewalks like she is collecting evidence for a felony trial. The HOA method here is forced photo inspections. They demand close-up pictures on a deadline, and if you do not send them fast enough, they fine you for refusal to cooperate. The problem started 2 days ago when I shoveled my driveway after an overnight snowfall. I piled the snow along the edge near the storm drain, same as I always do, same as everyone on this block does. Linda showed up that afternoon with her clipboard and told me I was creating a flooding hazard. I asked her to show me the rule, and she rattled off a section number like she was reciting scripture. When I asked to see the actual policy document, she said she did not have it with her, but she would email it. The email never came. Instead, I got a violation notice the next morning with a fine schedule attached. $200 immediately, then $50 per day until I moved the snow pile. The notice said the HOA could call the city within hours if I refused, and I needed proof before officials arrived. That was the time pressure. I had less than a day to figure out what was real and what was not, because Linda was already drafting an email blast to the neighborhood group chat framing me as the one resident who refuses winter safety. I know this because my ally, a board member named Greg, leaked it to me. Greg has been on the board for 6 years and he is fed up. He told me Linda has been inventing violations all winter to justify her role, and the board is too scared to push back because she threatens to quit and take her winter patrol with her. Greg sent me internal emails showing that Linda had flagged 17 residents for snow violations in January alone, and 15 of them paid without questioning it. I decided not to pay. I am dealing with a family medical expense right now, and every bogus fee hurts. My mom is in a facility downstate and the costs are adding up faster than I can track. I cannot afford to throw $200 at a compliance officer who is making up rules as she goes. So I did what I do best. I started documenting everything. I have a security camera on my garage that covers the driveway and the street. It records 24/7 with timestamps. I pulled the footage from the day I shoveled and the day Linda came by. The timestamp showed exactly when I cleared the driveway, where I put the snow, and when Linda arrived. More importantly, they showed that the storm drain was completely clear. There was no blockage, no ice dam, no flooding risk. The snow pile I made was at least 3 feet away from the drain opening, and you could see water flowing into it from the melt runoff. I saved the clips to a thumb drive and sent a copy to Greg. Greg called me that night and told me Linda was escalating. She had sent an attorney letter to my address, and it was full of bluff language meant to scare me into paying instantly. The letter claimed the HOA had the authority to place a lien on my property if I did not comply within 72 hours, and it cited a bunch of statute numbers that sounded official but meant nothing in this context. I looked them up. They were real statutes, but they applied to unpaid dues and special assessments, not made-up snow violations. The letter was a scare tactic, and it was working on other people. Greg told me 2 other residents had already paid after getting similar letters. I was not going to pay, but I also was not going to ignore it. I called an attorney I know from my notary work, a guy named Paul who handles property disputes. I asked him if the HOA could actually lien my house over a snow pile, and he laughed. He said no, not unless the violation was in the recorded covenants and I had gone through a formal hearing process with notice and an opportunity to defend myself. He said the letter was almost certainly a bluff, and if I wanted to fight it, I should demand a hearing and force them to show the rule in writing. He also told me to keep the security footage safe, because it was the kind of evidence that could shut down a bad faith claim in about 30 seconds. So I sent an email to the HOA management company requesting a formal hearing. I attached a still image from the security footage showing the clear drain and the snow pile location, and I asked them to provide the written policy Linda was enforcing. I kept the tone polite but firm. I did not accuse anyone of lying. I just asked for documentation. The response came back within 2 hours, and it was not from the management company. It was from Linda. She said the hearing was scheduled for the following week during a storm day when travel was dangerous, and if I did not attend, I would forfeit my right to appeal. She also said I needed to submit my photo evidence 24 hours in advance, and the photos had to show the drain from multiple angles in current conditions. That meant I had to go back outside in the middle of the next snowstorm and take new pictures, even though the footage I already had was definitive. It was a stalling tactic, and it was designed to make me give up. I did not give up. I went outside the next morning in the middle of a fresh snowfall and took the pictures. The drain was still clear. The snow pile was still 3 feet away. I sent the photos to Linda and copied the management company. Then I waited. The hearing was set for the clubhouse entry sidewalk, which was a bizarre choice because it was outside and exposed to the weather. Linda insisted on it. She said the clubhouse interior was being used for another meeting, which Greg later told me was a lie. The real reason was that Linda wanted to control the environment. She wanted me standing in the cold, distracted by the wind and the snow, while she had her paperwork organized and her talking points ready. It was psychological warfare, and it was pathetic. I showed up early with my evidence binder. The binder had printed stills from the security footage, the attorney letter with Paul's notes in the margin explaining why it was invalid, the email chain with Linda, and a copy of the HOA covenants with the relevant sections highlighted. I also had my phone with the full video clips ready to play. Greg met me there and told me Linda was planning to bring 2 other board members as backup, both of them people who owed her favors. He said I needed to be ready for them to rubber stamp whatever she said, unless I could flip the room with something undeniable. That was when I told Greg about the trump card. I did not stop her, because I wanted her on record. I had been holding on to something bigger than the security footage, something I found while digging through the HOA financials that Greg had leaked to me. It was an invoice trail showing suspicious kickbacks to an HOA vendor, and Linda's name was all over the approval signatures. The vendor was a snow removal company that charged triple the market rate, and every invoice was routed through Linda for approval. The kickback was not direct cash. It was gift cards and expense reimbursements coded as winter safety supplies. But the amounts were absurd. $1,500 in January alone. Greg had sent me the scans because he suspected fraud, but he did not have the authority to act on it. I did, because I was about to make it public. I was not going to reveal the kickback trail until Linda tried to shut me down in the hearing. I wanted her to commit fully to her story, to double down on the fake violation and the scare tactics, so that when I dropped the financial evidence, it would be impossible for her to spin it. Paul had told me this was the right move. He said if you have a trump card, you play it when your opponent is all in, not before. Linda arrived 10 minutes late with her 2 board members, both of them bundled up and looking miserable. She had a rolling cart full of binders and a laptop, which was overkill for a driveway snow dispute. She set up on the sidewalk like it was a trial, and she started by reading a prepared statement. She said I had violated Section 12.4 of the Winter Safety Addendum, which prohibited residents from creating drainage blockages during snow events. She said my snow pile was a clear violation, and the photos I submitted were not sufficient because they did not show the drain from the angle she specified. She said the fine stood, and if I did not pay within 48 hours, the HOA would escalate to a lien filing. I let her finish. Then I pulled out my phone and played one clip on speaker. It was the timestamp from the day Linda came to my driveway. You could hear her voice on the recording, telling me I was creating a flooding hazard. You could also hear me asking her to show me where the blockage was, and her refusing to answer. The clip was 20 seconds long, and when it ended, the board members looked at each other and said nothing. Linda's face went red, and she said the recording was inadmissible because I did not have her consent. I told her Illinois is a one-party consent state, and I was within my rights to record a conversation I was part of on my own property. Paul had coached me on this. Linda tried to recover. She said the footage did not matter because the rule was clear and I was still in violation. I asked her to show me the written rule. She opened one of her binders and flipped through it, and I could see her fingers shaking. She pulled out a page and handed it to me. It was a printout of an email, not a policy document. The email was from Linda to the board, dated 3 weeks ago, proposing a new winter drainage rule. At the bottom of the email, there was a line that said pending board approval. I held it up and read that line out loud. Pending board approval. I looked at the 2 board members and asked them if they had ever approved this rule. They looked at Linda. Linda said it was approved verbally at the last meeting. Greg, who was standing off to the side, said that was a lie. He said the winter addendum Linda was citing was never approved, and the board packet from that meeting showed a blank signature page. That was the twist. The rule Linda was enforcing did not exist. She had invented it, proposed it in an email, and started fining people before the board even voted on it. The 2 board members looked like they wanted to disappear into the snow. One of them, a guy named Tom, asked Linda if this was true. Linda said it was a misunderstanding, and the rule was implied by the existing covenants. I asked her to show me where in the covenants it said anything about snow pile placement. She could not. The hearing fell apart. Tom said they needed to table the discussion and review the documents. Linda said there was nothing to review and the fine was valid. I said I was not paying a fine based on a rule that did not exist, and if the HOA tried to lien my property, I would file a complaint with the state and copy every local news outlet I could find. That got their attention. Greg told me later that the board was terrified of bad press because another HOA in the area had just been sued for selective enforcement and it had cost them 6 figures in legal fees. Linda tried one more angle. She said even if the specific rule was not approved, I was still creating a nuisance and the HOA had the right to address it under the General Welfare Clause. I asked her how a snow pile 3 feet away from a clear drain was a nuisance. She said it was a visual blight and it lowered property values. I asked her if she had any appraisal data to support that claim. She did not. I asked her if any other resident on my street had been fined for the same thing. She said that was confidential. Greg said it was not confidential and he had the violation log, and I was the only one on my block who had been flagged for snow placement all winter. If you are enjoying this, please hit the like button and subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. That was when I played the trump card. I pulled out the second binder, the one with the invoice trail. I said I had been reviewing the HOA financials that were provided to me under the Illinois Condominium Property Act, which requires associations to make financial records available to owners on request. I said I noticed some irregularities in the snow removal vendor invoices, and I had some questions about the approval process. I opened the binder to the first flagged invoice and held it up. It showed a charge of $4,000 for a single plow pass, which was triple the going rate in our area. Linda's signature was on the approval line. I asked her why she had approved an invoice that was so far above market rate and whether she had gotten competitive bids before signing off. She said the vendor was the only one available on short notice. I asked her if she had any documentation of that claim. She said it was handled verbally. I flipped to the next page. It was a reimbursement request from Linda for winter safety supplies. The amount was $1,500, and the attached receipts were gift cards to a home improvement store. I asked her what safety supplies she had purchased with $1,500 in gift cards. She said it was salt and ice melt and replacement shovels for the common areas. I asked her if the HOA had receipts showing what she actually bought. She said the receipts were in the finance file. Greg said he had checked the finance file and there were no receipts, just the gift card stubs. Linda said Greg was misrepresenting the situation. Greg said he was not, and he had forwarded the file to the management company for review 2 days ago. Tom asked Linda if she wanted to respond. Linda said this was a distraction and we were supposed to be talking about my snow violation. I said the two issues were connected, because Linda had been inventing violations to justify her role and funneling HOA money to a vendor that was likely giving her kickbacks. I said I was not accusing her of anything criminal, but I was asking for an independent audit before the HOA tried to fine me another $1. Tom said that was a reasonable request. The other board member, a woman named Karen who I had never met before, said she wanted to see the full invoice trail before they took any further action on my case. Linda lost it. She said I was slandering her and she could sue me for defamation. I said defamation requires a false statement and I was only asking questions based on public records. Paul had coached me on this too. Linda said she was done with this meeting and she was escalating to the management company. I said that was fine with me, because the management company would have to review the same financial records I just showed the board. Linda grabbed her cart and stormed off. Her printed packet went airborne in a gust of snow and the pages scattered across the sidewalk. One of them landed in a slush puddle, and I watched the ink start to bleed. It was the funniest thing I had seen all week. The hearing ended and Greg told me I had just blown up Linda's entire operation. He said the board was going to have to do an audit now, and if the kickback trail was as bad as it looked, Linda was going to be forced out. He also said the HOA would probably drop my fine to avoid the headache, but I should be ready for Linda to retaliate before she went down. I asked him what kind of retaliation. He said Linda had a history of blocking driveways and filing false police reports when residents fought back. He told me to keep my camera running and document everything. He was right. 2 days later, I woke up to find orange cones blocking my driveway. There were 6 of them, arranged in a line across the apron so I could not pull out. I went outside and moved them, and 20 minutes later, Linda showed up with a clipboard and told me I was tampering with HOA safety equipment. I asked her what safety equipment. She said the cones were marking a hazard zone because my driveway had ice buildup and it was a liability. I looked at my driveway. There was no ice. I had salted it the night before and the surface was clear. I told Linda there was no hazard and she needed to remove the cones. She said the cones were staying until I paid my outstanding fine and submitted a photo log proving the driveway was safe. I asked her what photo log. She said it was a new requirement as of this morning and she had emailed me the instructions. I checked my phone. There was no email. I called Greg and he told me to call the non-emergency police line and report the blockage as harassment. He said Linda did not have the authority to block my driveway, and if she refused to move the cones, the police could make her. I called the line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said they would send an officer to check it out, but it might take an hour because they were dealing with storm-related calls. I said that was fine. I waited in my car with the engine running and the camera pointed at the driveway. Linda stayed on the sidewalk with her clipboard writing notes. Every few minutes she would walk up to the cones and adjust them, making sure they were perfectly aligned. It was the most passive-aggressive thing I had ever seen. At one point she took out her keyring and jingled the gate fobs at me like she was taunting a dog. I did not react. I just kept the camera rolling. The police officer arrived about 40 minutes later. He was a deputy from the county sheriff's department, and he looked annoyed. He walked up to Linda first and asked her what was going on. She launched into a speech about HOA authority and winter safety protocols and liability zones. The deputy let her finish, then asked her if she had any documentation showing the HOA had the right to block a private driveway. Linda said it was in the covenants. The deputy asked to see the covenants. Linda said she did not have them with her. The deputy asked her if she was the property owner. Linda said no, she was the compliance officer. The deputy asked her if the homeowner had requested the cones. Linda said no, but the HOA had the authority to place them for safety reasons. The deputy said that was not how it worked, and if the homeowner wanted the cones removed, she needed to move them. Linda said she was not moving them. The deputy said then he would move them, and if she put them back, he would cite her for obstruction. That was the moment I knew I had won. The deputy walked over to my car and asked if I wanted the cones removed. I said yes. He picked them up one by one and stacked them on the curb. Linda was screaming about HOA authority and county overreach, but the deputy ignored her. He told me if she put them back, I should call again and they would handle it. Then he walked over to Linda and told her she needed to step back from the property line. Linda said this was not over. The deputy said it was over for today, and if she kept harassing the homeowner, he would write her up for disorderly conduct. Linda got in her car and drove off. I sat there for a minute just breathing. My hands were shaking, and I realized I'd been holding my breath the entire time the deputy was talking to Linda. I checked the camera footage, and it had captured everything. The cones, Linda's refusal to move them, the deputy's intervention, and Linda's meltdown. I saved the clip and sent it to Greg. He replied within minutes and said the board was holding an emergency meeting that night, and I should be ready to present my evidence. The emergency meeting was at the clubhouse, indoors this time. There were 8 board members in the room, plus the HOA management company representative and Linda. I was allowed to attend as an observer and speak during the open comment period. Greg had told me the board was going to address the audit findings and Linda's conduct, and this was my chance to push for a resolution. I brought both binders and the thumb drive with all the footage. The meeting started with the management company rep reading a summary of the audit. They had reviewed the snow removal invoices and the reimbursement requests, and they had found multiple red flags. The vendor Linda had been using was owned by her brother-in-law, which was not disclosed in any of the approval documents. The invoices were consistently 2 to 3 times higher than comparable services in the area, and there were no competitive bids on file. The reimbursement request for safety supplies had no supporting receipts, and the amounts did not match any inventory records. The rep said the findings suggested a conflict of interest and possible misappropriation of funds, and the management company was recommending an independent forensic review before taking further action. Linda tried to defend herself. She said her brother-in-law ran a legitimate business and he was the only vendor available during the winter season. She said the reimbursements were for supplies that were distributed to residents, and if the receipts were missing, it was an administrative error. She said the whole thing was being blown out of proportion because one resident, meaning me, had filed a frivolous complaint to avoid paying a valid fine. Tom cut her off and said the fine was not valid because the rule Linda had cited was never approved by the board. Linda said that was a technicality. Tom said it was not a technicality, it was fraud. That word hung in the air for a long time. Linda looked like she had been slapped. She started to argue, but the management company rep interrupted and said the board needed to vote on whether to remove Linda from her compliance officer role pending the forensic review. Linda said they could not do that without cause. The rep said the audit findings were cause. Tom made a motion to suspend Linda immediately. Another board member seconded. The vote was 7-1 in favor, with Linda voting against. She was told to turn in her clipboard, her gate fobs, and her access credentials by the end of the week. Then they addressed my case. Tom said the board was dropping all fines related to the snow violation, effective immediately. He said the HOA would also refund any money I had paid in connection with the case, although I had not paid anything, so that was symbolic. He said the board would review the winter safety policies and bring any new rules to a full vote before enforcing them. He said the HOA was issuing a written correction to all residents, clarifying that the snow drainage rule Linda had cited was not in effect and never had been. He apologized on behalf of the board for the confusion and the harassment I had experienced. Linda stood up and said this was a witch hunt and she was being scapegoated for doing her job. Greg said she was not being scapegoated, she was being held accountable for inventing rules and steering contracts to her family. Linda said she was going to file a complaint with the state and sue the board for wrongful termination. The management company rep said she was not an employee, she was a volunteer board appointee, and the board had the authority to remove her at any time. Linda said she would see them in court. Then she grabbed her coat and walked out. She left the key ring on the table. I watched the gate fobs catch the light as the door closed behind her. The meeting ended and Tom came over to shake my hand. He said I had done the HOA a favor by forcing the audit, because the financial issues were bigger than just Linda. He said the board was going to have to overhaul the vendor approval process and put better checks in place. He also said he understood why I fought the fine instead of paying it, and he respected that. He said a lot of residents just pay because it is easier, and that is how people like Linda get away with this stuff for years. I asked him what would happen to Linda now. He said the forensic review would take a few weeks, and if it confirmed the kickback scheme, the board would forward the findings to the state attorney general's office. He said it was possible Linda would face criminal charges, but that was out of the board's hands. He said in the meantime, Linda was banned from all HOA meetings in common areas, and if she showed up at my house again, I should call the police immediately. He said the board would send a formal letter to Linda and her attorney, making that clear. I walked out of the clubhouse and stood in the parking lot for a minute. The snow had stopped and the sky was clear for the first time in days. I could see my breath in the air and my hands were still shaking, but this time it was relief. I had been fighting this for 2 weeks and it felt like 2 months. I got in my car and drove home, and when I pulled into my driveway, the cones were gone and the surface was clear. I sat there in the dark with the engine off and let it sink in. I had won. Linda was out. The fine was dropped. The rule was fake. The HOA was issuing corrections. I had made them refund every bogus snow-related fine they ever sent me, even though I had never paid one. But I was not done yet. A week later, Greg called me and said Linda was trying to spin the story. She had posted on the neighborhood group chat claiming she was forced out by a vindictive resident who filed false accusations, and she was gathering signatures for a petition to reinstate her. A few people had signed it, mostly neighbors who did not know the full story. Greg said the board was planning to send a clarification email with the audit summary, but he wanted to know if I was okay with them mentioning my name. I said yes. I wanted people to know what actually happened. The clarification email went out the next day. It was 3 pages long, and it included a sanitized summary of the audit findings, the board vote to remove Linda, and a statement that the snow violation against my property was found to be baseless and had been rescinded. It also included a line thanking me for bringing the financial irregularities to the board's attention. Within an hour, the group chat exploded. People started asking questions about other fines they had paid, other vendors Linda had approved, other rules she had enforced. A neighbor I had never spoken to messaged me privately and said Linda had fined them $200 last year for a snowpile in the exact same spot as mine, and they paid it because they did not know they could fight it. They asked if they could get a refund. I told them to contact the board and reference the audit findings. Over the next 2 weeks, 17 residents came forward with similar stories. Linda had been targeting people all winter with fake violations and inflated fines, and most of them paid because they thought the rules were real. The board set up a dispute resolution process and started reviewing every fine Linda had issued since she took the compliance officer role. By the end of the month, they had refunded over $8,000 in bogus fees. The forensic audit confirmed the kickback scheme, and the board voted to file a complaint with the state. Linda hired an attorney and threatened to sue, but her attorney dropped her after reviewing the evidence. The final showdown happened at the USPS mailbox cluster curb in early March. I was picking up my mail and Linda was there blocking my access with her clipboard. She was no longer the compliance officer, but she still acted like she had authority. She said I had ruined her reputation and cost her thousands of dollars in lost reimbursements. I said she had ruined her own reputation by stealing from the HOA and harassing residents. She said she was going to make sure everyone knew what kind of person I was. I said everyone already knew what kind of person she was, and if she did not step back, I was calling the police. She said I could not do that because we were on public property. I said harassment is harassment no matter where it happens, and I had her on camera threatening me at least 4 times. A deputy happened to be driving by and pulled over. He recognized me from the driveway incident. He told Linda to step back and let me get my mail. Linda said she had every right to be there. The deputy said she did, but she did not have the right to block access or harass another resident. He told her if he got another call about her, he would charge her with disorderly conduct. Linda got in her car and left. That was the last time I saw her. I heard later that she moved out of the neighborhood and bought a condo in a building with no HOA. Greg said the board got a resignation letter from her attorney and she signed over her access credentials without a fight. The forensic audit final report went to the state attorney general's office, and I never heard what came of it. I assume there was a settlement or a plea deal because Linda never went to trial. The HOA refunded the snow-related fines, voided the ledger entries, and issued a written correction to all residents, confirming that the winter drainage rule had never been approved and was not enforceable. The board also passed a new transparency policy requiring all proposed rules to be posted online with a 30-day comment period before a vote, and all vendor contracts over a certain amount had to go through a competitive bid process with at least 3 quotes. Greg said it was the most significant governance reform the HOA had passed in 10 years, and it only happened because I refused to pay a bogus fine and kept pushing until the whole system broke open. I still live in the neighborhood and I still shovel my snow into the same pile near the storm drain. No one has said a word about it since. The new compliance officer, a retired teacher named Sharon, walks the neighborhood once a week and mostly just waves at people. She does not carry a clipboard or a tape measure, and she definitely does not jingle gate fobs at residents. The HOA is quieter now, and that is how it should be. People pay their dues, follow the real rules, and live their lives without someone inventing violations to justify their existence. A few weeks after everything settled, I got a message from the neighbor who had reached out during the group chat explosion. They said they wanted to thank me in person, so we met for coffee. They told me Linda had fined them twice in the same winter for violations they never understood, and both times they paid because Linda made it sound like they had no choice. They said after seeing my case they realized they had been bullied, and they wished they had fought back sooner. They also said other neighbors felt the same way. There was a quiet resentment that had been building for years, and no one knew how to deal with it until I forced the issue. They said I had changed the culture of the HOA by refusing to back down, and they were grateful. I did not feel like a hero. I felt tired. The whole fight had taken 2 months out of my life, cost me hours of sleep, and added stress I did not need while dealing with my mom's care. But I also felt like I had done something that mattered. I had stopped Linda from fining me for snow that did not exist, exposed a kickback scheme, forced the board to reform its policies, and got refunds for 17 other residents who had been scammed the same way. And I did it all with a security camera, a thumb drive, and an ally on the board who was fed up enough to leak the truth. Greg told me later that Linda tried to spin the story one more time on a community Facebook page outside the neighborhood. She posted a long rant about HOA overreach and vindictive residents in kangaroo courts. A few people liked it, but most of the comments were from people asking why she did not just follow the rules and get competitive bids. Someone linked to a news article about HOA board members getting charged with embezzlement in another state, and the conversation shifted to whether Linda should have been prosecuted. The post got deleted a day later, and Linda deactivated her account. The city inspector who had been scheduled to visit my property during the original time pressure window finally showed up in April, long after the case was closed. He said he was doing a follow-up on a winter complaint filed by the HOA, and he needed to check my storm drain for code violations. I showed him the drain and the snow pile location, which was now just a bare patch of grass. He took a few photos and said there was no violation. He also said the HOA could not enforce drainage placement rules unless they were tied to an actual municipal code, which they were not. I asked him if he had ever seen an HOA try to enforce a fake rule before. He laughed and said all the time. He said the city gets complaints from HOAs every winter about snow piles and ice dams and sidewalk conditions, and 90% of the time the HOA is making it up. He said if I ever got another violation notice, I should call his office first before paying anything, because they can confirm what the HOA can actually enforce and what is just harassment. That was the payback vector. A city inspector confirming what the HOA cannot enforce. It was the missing piece I should have gotten at the start, but I did not know to ask for it. The inspector gave me his card and told me to keep it handy. He said people like Linda count on residents not knowing the difference between HOA rules and actual laws, and the moment you bring in a municipal official, the whole scam falls apart. He said he wished more people fought back the way I did. I kept the card in my wallet, and I never had to use it again. The new compliance officer never targeted me, and the HOA dropped every snow-related case they had pending after the audit findings went public. The board sent a follow-up email in May summarizing the winter season and thanking residents for their patience during the policy review. They also announced that Linda had resigned and would not be returning. The email did not mention the kickbacks or the fraud investigation, but everyone knew. The neighborhood group chat had already moved on to summer topics, but every once in a while someone would post a joke about orange cones or clipboards, and everyone would know what it meant. The stakes for me had been personal and immediate. I was paying for my mom's care and I could not afford to waste money on fake fines. That financial pressure made me fight harder than I might have otherwise, because every dollar mattered. But the fight turned out to be bigger than just my situation. By refusing to pay and forcing the board to show their work, I had uncovered a system that was designed to exploit residents who did not know their rights. Linda had been running that system for years, and she only got caught because I had the tools and the stubbornness to document everything and push back. Greg told me the board was still working on the governance reforms, and they were planning to bring in a professional management company to handle compliance going forward. He said volunteer board members should not have unchecked authority to fine residents, and the old system had been ripe for abuse. He also said the board had gotten feedback from other residents about different issues, things like landscaping rules and parking enforcement, and they were planning a full review of the covenants to make sure everything was clear and enforceable. He said it was going to take a year, but it was worth it. I stayed involved for a while, attending board meetings and reading the minutes. I wanted to make sure the reforms actually happened, and the board did not slide back into old habits. Sharon, the new compliance officer, turned out to be everything Linda was not. She was friendly, transparent, and focused on actual safety issues instead of inventing violations. She sent out a monthly newsletter with updates on common area maintenance and upcoming projects, and she made herself available to answer questions without the theatrics. The neighborhood started to feel less like a surveillance state and more like a community. One of the best moments came in June when the board held a special meeting to vote on the new policies. They invited residents to attend and comment, and the room was packed. People who had never shown up to a meeting before were there, asking questions and pushing for accountability. Tom, the board president, said it was the highest turnout he had ever seen, and he credited the winter audit mess for waking people up. He said the board had learned a hard lesson about oversight, and they were committed to making sure it did not happen again. The policies passed unanimously, and the room applauded. I sat in the back and felt like I could finally exhale. The boomerang moment came during that same meeting. Someone in the crowd asked about the old fine structure and whether Linda had the authority to issue daily fines the way she did. Tom said no, she did not. He said the daily fine escalation Linda had threatened was not in the covenants, and even if it had been, the board would have had to approve each individual fine after a formal hearing. He said Linda had been issuing threats that sounded official, but had no legal backing, and that was part of why the board had removed her. Then someone read Linda's boomerang line out loud from an old email. "I can fine you daily until the snow melts and you cry." The room went silent for a second, and then people started laughing. It was the kind of nervous laughter that comes when you realize you have been scared of something that was never real. Tom said that line was exactly the kind of thing the new policies were designed to prevent. He said no one should ever feel threatened by their HOA, and if they do, they need to bring it to the board immediately. I thought about Karen's catchphrase, "This is not snow, it is non-compliance." She had said it to me at least 3 times during the fight, and every time it sounded more absurd. The idea that snow, a natural weather event, could be reframed as a compliance issue was peak HOA insanity. But that was how Linda operated. She turned normal life into violations, and she used official-sounding language to make people believe they had no choice but to pay. The catchphrase became a running joke in the neighborhood after the story got out. People would post pictures of snow and caption them, "This is not snow, it is non-compliance," and everyone would get the reference. It was a way of reclaiming the absurdity and making sure Linda's tactics would not work on anyone else. By the end of summer, the forensic audit was complete, and the board received the final report. Greg called me and said the findings were worse than they thought. Linda had funneled over $20,000 to her brother-in-law's snow removal company over 3 winters, and the reimbursement scheme had been going on for at least 2 years. The board forwarded the report to the state attorney general, and a few weeks later, Linda was charged with theft and fraud. The case was settled out of court with a plea deal that required her to pay restitution and stay away from any HOA leadership role for 5 years. She did not go to jail, but she lost her reputation and her foothold in the neighborhood. People who had defended her at the start quietly stopped talking about it. The HOA sent a final letter to all residents in October, summarizing the resolution. They confirmed that all snow-related fines from the previous winter had been voided, and refunds had been issued to affected residents. They confirmed that the snow drainage rule Linda had cited was not approved and would not be enforced. They confirmed that the vendor approval process had been overhauled and all future contracts would go through competitive bidding. And they confirmed that Linda had been removed from her role and would not be returning. The letter ended with an apology to residents who had been impacted by the compliance issues and a commitment to rebuilding trust. It was the kind of letter that should not have been necessary, but it was necessary because the system had failed. I framed a copy of that letter and hung it in my home office as a reminder, not because I wanted to relive the fight, but because I wanted to remember what happens when you push back. Linda had counted on me paying the fine and going away quietly. She had counted on the board backing her because they always had before. She had counted on the system protecting her because it was designed to. But I did not pay, the board did not back her, and the system broke under scrutiny. The letter was proof that resistance works, even against something as petty and absurd as an HOA snow violation. Greg told me the board was planning to dedicate the next annual meeting to governance and transparency, and they wanted me to speak about my experience. I said I would think about it. I did not want to turn into the neighborhood guy who fought the HOA, because that is not who I am. I am a notary who keeps everything documented, and I fought because I had the tools and the motivation. But Greg said it mattered, because other people needed to know they could fight too. He said the neighborhood had changed because of what happened, and that change was fragile. It needed people to keep showing up and holding the board accountable, or it would slide back. I agreed to speak, and when the annual meeting came around, I told the story in 5 minutes. I focused on the documentation, the evidence, the ally, and the refusal to accept a rule that did not exist. I did not mention Linda by name, but everyone knew who I was talking about. I ended by saying the best defense against HOA abuse is knowing your rights and refusing to be intimidated. People clapped, and a few of them came up afterward to thank me. One of them was the neighbor who had messaged me during the group chat explosion. They said they had filed a dispute over a landscaping fine from 2 years ago, and the board had refunded it after reviewing the case. They said it felt good to get that money back, but it felt better to know the system was changing. The snow came back the next winter, and I shoveled my driveway the same way I always had. I piled the snow near the storm drain and no one said a word. Sharon stopped by once to check that the common area sidewalks were clear, and she thanked me for keeping my section clean. There were no cones, no clipboards, no threats, no daily fines. The orange cone that had been half buried in the snow during the first confrontation was still sitting in the clubhouse storage shed, a relic of Linda's reign. Sharon said she kept it as a reminder of what not to do. I still see Linda's keyring with the gate fobs in my mind sometimes, the way she jingled them to assert authority she did not have. It was such a small thing, but it said everything about how she operated. She used props and symbols to make herself seem official, and she counted on people not questioning her. The moment the deputy told her to step back and someone finally challenged the performance, it all fell apart. That keyring ended up on the board table, abandoned, and I hope it stayed there as a warning. The HOA dropped the case to avoid a public records mess, and Karen was told to step down and she could not spin it. Those two outcomes were the endgame, and they happened exactly the way they needed to. Linda tried to control the narrative after she was removed, but the audit findings and the board vote were public record, and there was no spinning that. She could post on Facebook and gather signatures and hire an attorney, but the facts were the facts, and the facts showed she had been running a scam. A city inspector confirmed what the HOA could not enforce, and that confirmation became the foundation for every refund and every policy change that followed. Linda's printed packet went airborne in a gust of snow, and that image stayed with me as the perfect metaphor for how her authority vanished the moment someone questioned it. I learned a lot from that fight, but the biggest lesson was this. Most HOA abuse is built on bluff and intimidation. The rules sound official, the threats sound real, and the paperwork looks legitimate. But when you actually check the covenants, pull the meeting minutes, and demand documentation, the whole system collapses. Linda had been enforcing fake rules for years, and she got away with it because people assumed she knew what she was doing. The moment I stopped assuming and started documenting, the game was over. The neighborhood is quieter now, and I like it that way. I still get my mail at the USPS cluster box, and I have never had another confrontation there. I still see Greg at board meetings, and he still sends me updates on policy changes. The HOA is not perfect, but it is better than it was, and that is enough. I paid for my mom's care through the end of her life, and the money I saved by not paying Linda's bogus fines helped cover some of the final expenses. She passed away in the fall, and I do not think she ever knew about the HOA fight. I am glad for that. She had enough to worry about without knowing her son was battling a neighborhood compliance officer over a snow pile. I think about the stakes sometimes, and how close I came to just paying the fine to make it go away. If I had paid, Linda would still be in power. The kickback scheme would still be running. The fake rules would still be enforced. 17 other residents would still be out thousands of dollars. The board would still be rubber stamping whatever Linda put in front of them, and I would still be wondering if I did the right thing by giving in. But I did not give in, and the outcome justified the fight. The HOA refunded the snow-related fines, voided the ledger entries, and issued a written correction to all residents. Linda was forced out, charged, and banned from HOA leadership. The policies were reformed, the culture changed, and I kept my money. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you being here.